Swords come from a long process, forging of going back and forth to be shaped and molded into the shape that a smith sees fit. And we are like these swords. We are too molded and shaped by a smith, which God is our smith. There are 4 core parts to forging a sword. But the process starts elsewhere. It begins with the iron itself. Its environment is stone, but the iron is pure. From its environment, though, it picks up the stone around it and it gets embedded into it, and it has to be stripped. The iron is stripped of its impurities by a fire. And Isaiah 48:10 tells us exactly what this fire is. Behold, I have refined thee, but not with silver. I have chosen you in the furnace of affliction. The word affliction there is different than how we usually use it. Usually we use affliction to mean a sickness or an illness, but a better translation for that word would have been humility. Through humility, we are stripped of our impurities and are ready to move on to the next step, which is a very small step, but important one. Because if the iron does not keep its purity from the fire, even from this one step, it has to go back. It has to try again to get its impurities stripped of it. However, if it does indeed maintain the purity, it goes on to the next part, the shaping of the iron. The iron is shaped and molded by the smith. And it has to be hot in order for those strikes to take change, in order for the steel to be shaped in the way that the smith wants us to be. Stay? Yeah, it stays. Psalms 51:10. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. What's being asked here is that God, our smith, creates a clean heart, something pure and humble. And David there asks to renew the spirit in him, which begs the question, what spirit is in us? I mean, if it's renewed, we have to have it in the first place, whether that's up to standard or not, but we have to have it. It tells us for at least my Bible, the very first page, Genesis 1:26. And God said, let us make man in our image and our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, the fowl of the air, all of creation. We have the Spirit in us, and God seeks to mold us into a shape that furthers his purpose for us. In the beginning, we were meant to have dominion over it and rule as he would. We have chosen to forge ourselves. But I don't see the sword picking up the hammer. It doesn't have that power. It's unable to. The smith has to take it and mold it. But if it takes too long, or the sword isn't quite the shape that it needs to be in before moving on, it has to go back. Back to the furnace. Back to be stripped of the impurities, to make sure it's ready to be shifted and molded. Then it has to go where it just was. Back to be shaped by the smith. And if the smith deems it ready, it moves onward. I don't have water in this bucket, but usually the steel is hot and would have to be plunged into water to do a very important piece, and it tests the steel. Because if the steel's not ready, it'll twist, it'll bend, it'll be out of shape. Psalms 26:2. Examine me, O Lord, and prove me. Try my reins and my heart. Make sure that I'm ready to be molded, to be tested, and then test me. Elsewhere, say James, says to count it all joy when those tests arise. I'm going to flip back further in Psalms to 66:10. For you, O God, have proved us. You have tried us as silver is tried. I mean, there's the analogy right there. Just as steel is stripped of its impurities and shifted, it's tested. So are we. And then at 139, verses 23 and 24, I think most of us in here recognize it. Search me, try me, see if there's any wicked way in me. The word wicked there means twisted. It's not in shape, just as this is. When the iron is shaped and the smith deems it well, it's tested in the water, and it comes up a new creation, something that stays that way, or at least it should. We have a symbolic act that we do to represent this, that's also going under the water and coming up a new creation. We call this baptism. If the sword, however, bends, once again, it restarts. Back into the furnace to make sure it's humble, make sure it can be molded and shifted. Back to the anvil to be molded. That's the wrong side. Thank goodness it didn't break. I need this. Back to be tested to make sure it doesn't bend, twist, to make sure it isn't wicked. And if it does indeed maintain its shape, goes to the next part. A constant thing, something that doesn't let up. To sharpen it, to make sure that it's used for its proper purpose. Because during that sharpening, it also makes sure that steel has indeed kept its shape and that it wasn't just a fluke when it was tested. Make sure that it can apply it to its daily use, to our daily walks. Because as much as the grind wheel can sharpen, can also dull. And what use to you is a dull blade? I mean, I don't cook a whole lot, but I know that I got to keep my knives sharp, because then they don't do their purpose. Because if it's dull, it can chip. And if it chips, it goes back into the furnace to make sure it can be shifted. Goes back to the anvil to be shifted. Goes back to the water to be tested before it comes back to where it was to be sharpened. First Peter 6 and 7. Wherein you greatly rejoice, though now for a season, if need be, you are in the heaviness through manifold temptations, that the trial of your faith, being much more precious than gold that perishes, though it be tried with fire, might be found unto praise and honor and glory at the appearing of Jesus Christ. That the tests and the trials, that the constant day-to-day is to do nothing but serve to shine the spotlight on God, on Jesus Christ. Isaiah 30:21. also helps prove this point. If I can find it. And your ears shall hear a word behind you saying, this is the way, this is the path, walk in it. We're told by God, and as we're being shifted and molded, we're shown that this is the path, walk, this is the way to go. Jesus says it himself in Luke 9:23 and he said to them all, if any man will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. The daily grind, making sure that it's sharpened and engraved into the sword, that its purpose is well served. This analogy is also famously said in Jeremiah, though it uses different materials. It says it with a potter and clay, that the potter, like God, shifts and molds the clay, and if it doesn't take to the shape, it restarts to try again and again until it does get the intended shape, the intended purpose. Pavel, could you come play? So, if you find yourself in any one of these states, if you are the iron in the furnace, being made humble and stripped of its impurities, or if you're on the anvil, being molded and shifted into the shape that God desires you to be, if you're being tested to see if you'll bend or stay in shape, or if it's just the day-to-day, being sharpened and made sure that your purpose is proper, you're sharp and ready to be used. I ask that you come to the altars. We've got prayer people, we've got Daniel, Nathaniel, and I'll be honest, I can't remember your name. Brianna, here to join with you in prayer, or if you'd like to just kneel at the altars on your own, I encourage you to do so, that you don't stay stuck in the forge, that you don't stay a dull blade, but maintain your sharpness and your form. That you're not just a sword in the forge, but you can be a completed sword that can leave it, that can change everywhere outside of just the forge.